At the beginning of day 4, you use the data group container to display employee information in a repeating item renderer. Now that you know how to create and apply Spark skins, I will introduce you to the Skinnable data container as the skinnable equivalent to the data group container. You will learn how to create a skin for the Skinnable data container and how to further modify the associated item renderer. This is the employee directory display that you created in day 4 with the data group container and an item renderer. Each employee has a discrete background display. In this video, I will show you how to convert the data group container into a skinnable data container and then apply this light gray background around the entire list of employees. I will also show you how to modify the item renderer to create hovered states for each employee. In earlier videos, you learned that the data group container itself is not a skinnable container. However, it does have a skinnable equivalent, the Skinnable Data Container class. The only difference between the two is that the Skinnable Data Container can have visual elements applied to it. You apply a skin class to it using the skin class property. This is the main application file for my example. I am locating the data group container and changing the opening and closing tags to the Skinnable data container. When I save the file and run the application, you can see that the application looks the same as it did before you applied the new container. From the Package Explorer view, I am opening the skins folder and then the backgroundskin.mxml class file. This file is configured with a contract between the host component and the Skinnable data container class. It also contains a states block with the normal and disabled states defined. The rect block draws a gray rectangle that is lightened with an alpha property and has rounded corners. You learned about all of these elements earlier in this day of training. Back in the main application file, I am adding the skin class property to the Skinnable data container class and referencing the skins.background skin class. When I save the file and run the application, you can see that neither the skin nor the content is displayed. Remember from the previous videos that the application container has one skin part named content group that represents all the content in the container. The Skinnable data container likewise has one skin part, but it is named data group and is an instance of the data group container. It represents all of the content in the container. In my example, that would be all the employees displayed via the item renderer. At the end of the backgroundskin.mxml file, I am adding a data group container with an ID property set to the value of data group with a small d to represent the skin part. When I save the file and run the application, you can see that the item renderer components display as before, but now their parent container has a background skin, which is really hard to see, but it is displayed between the components. I'm returning to the main application file to locate the Skinnable data container instance. I'm cutting the layout property from the instance and returning to the background skin. I'm pasting the layout property between the data group container tags. If a skin will always be applied to components to look the same in each instance, then move the layout property into it. If you want the flexibility of changing the layout for each instance of the component, then leave the layout property in the component instances. I'm adding a gap property to the vertical layout instance and assigning a value of 15 pixels. I'm also adding a padding top property with a value of 20 pixels and equivalent properties for padding bottom, padding right, and padding left. Now when I save the file and run the application, you can see that the item renderer instances are nicely spaced within a parent background. Remember that each item render display is defined in the item renderer property class. To create the skin for each of the item renderer instances, you simply add the visual elements to the renderer class file. I'm opening the employee item renderer.mxml file in the components directory, and then creating a second state named hovered. This border container block draws the background for each item renderer and also displays the employee data. Below the border container instance, I'm creating a rect instance with a height value of 100% and a width value of 100%. This will create a rectangle that will completely overlay the item renderer. Next, I'm creating a fill property tag set with a nested solid color instance that has an alpha value set to 0.2. This makes the highlight transparent. Lastly, I'm adding a color property with a value of #00748D to create a light highlight color when a user hovers over the item with the mouse. This code would display the new rectangle all the time. I am adding the include in property to the rect instance to define that it only appears in the hovered state. I'm adding the .hovered state to the color property as well. When I save the file and run the application, you can see when I mouse over an employee that he appears with a slight highlight. For your next step, work through the exercise titled Skinning the Skinnable Data Container.